Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Malabash Spotlights. Today, we have with us in the studio a really exciting guest that we are spotlighting, who is SaaS founder of a lot of podcasting software that is really groundbreaking and is helping podcasters to connect with guests and to kind of move their podcast forward as social audio is becoming a growing platform for the world, and especially during COVID, it's increased quite a bit. So we have with us Alex, and we're so glad, Alex, that you're on the show with us today. Thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, Ashley, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you and everybody today.
That's awesome. And Alex is an avid podcaster as well. He has multiple podcasts that he has done. He's been doing it for years, I think since 2016. So he's had a lot of experience, and a lot of that comes into play with his software that he has produced or created, produced as well. So I'm really excited to kind of learn the behind the scenes, what kind of actually started and interested. I've heard some of the stories, but I'm going to open up the floor to what was the driving force behind your podcast, and then we can kind of go into what kind of created you to form all these platforms and what was the basically groundbreaking ideas for that. So Alex, you go for it.
Sure.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. First, I want to say that you're my favorite kind of host because you're actually somebody who's curious. Like, you didn't just have me on the show because it was like the right thing to do. Like, not that there is a right reason to necessarily. Like, you have me on the show because you're like actually curious and you believe that it'll also benefit others. So, absolutely my favorite kind of host. I jump on about 200 last year, at least. I jumped on about 200 different shows as a guest. So it's just really cool to find like someone that's my favorite type. So thank you. Glad you're here. And thank you for having me, of course. So yeah, like a little bit about like my past with podcasting. When I first, I'll just mention this one like really briefly. But my first podcast was actually part of a Christian multi-author blog. So I started a blog many years ago, and someone's like, "Hey, you should do some audio too." So I was like, "All right." So I started a podcast just for fun with it, and that blog grew a lot, and so did that podcast. And then actually had the opportunity to sell that whole brand all together, if you will. And so that was a cool experience for me. That's kind of how I got my start in podcasting. But the podcast that really got me into software and things like that was the show that I think that we'll talk about more today, just because it makes more sense for everybody who's tuning in, listening. And it was originally called Creating a Brand. And so I launched this show, Creating a Brand, because I was interested in doing that for myself. At that point in my life, I had been at an aerospace organization for about 13 years. And at about year 10, I decided, you know what? I don't think I want to do this forever. Like, I think I actually want to move on to something else now. And don't get me wrong, I love the aerospace industry. Like, till the last day I was there, I gave 110%. Actually, like my last day there, like was like so bittersweet. Like walking out the door was like a sad moment for me. But I believe in like ending one season the way that you want the next one to begin. So like my last year there was my best year I ever had. Like, I crushed it. So I did really good. But at year 10, I just realized that like, I don't want to do this forever. And I want to start something on. So for about 2 years, because there's a gap there, right? 10 years is when I decided, and 15 years when I actually left. About 2 years in, I just kept on having like failed attempt after failed attempt. And again, I was really focused on the job, but I was doing all these little side hustles to see if anything would work. And I was like, man, I thought I was good at business. Apparently I'm not. Like, it just wasn't working. And that's what made me decide to start the podcast. I'm like, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be a curious host like you are. I'm going to actually do my best to just learn what I can from other people. So I just started bringing on guests that just had a lot of knowledge that I wanted. So I just started learning from them. And thankfully, that podcast just really, really took off quick. And I did not have a lot of influence online or anything like that, but it actually took off quick enough that I was able to get on stages as a podcast host, teaching other people how to podcast and things like that. So I traveled all around the place. I was usually doing about one a month was my goal. So I was traveling and speaking at one event per month. And that was kind of like my introduction to like the podcasting world, not just being a host, but getting to know the people in it. So that's a little bit of the backstory there for you.
Wow, that's a huge backstory. I didn't know aerospace, for one. I didn't know that. That's amazing. And
I should give you a disclaimer real quick, Ashley. Sorry, I gotta jump in there. I was not an astronaut, skydiver, or fighter pilot. I worked behind a computer like most people in that industry. So,
oh man, I was like, you almost knew an actual space nut.
Nope, sorry, I got nothing for you.
Oh, that's okay. But still, I mean, like that's a huge industry to jump from, and then go into podcasting and go into that different world as far as that goes, into completely different fields, and
Yeah.
the whole, I appreciate what you said about, the business and feeling like you're not making it. And, starting the podcast is kind of like a really great way of promoting yourself, basically. And a lot of people have kind of come to realize like that's a really huge thing. That's using newsletters, and I guess what I've been doing a lot of research recently, where newsletters, podcasts, and shows kind of helps get your business out there because it makes you valuable and valuable to your audience. So that's really cool to hear you say that.
Yeah. It's just one of the vehicles. Like podcasting isn't like, this sounds weird to say as a podcaster myself, but it's not like the single greatest thing in the world. It's just the vehicle that's worked really well for me. And I just kind of fell in love with the people in the industry that make up the podcast hosts and guests. Like it's just a really abundance like mindset is like the big thing I find in this industry. So it's just been the great vehicle for me. And I'm just happy to be part of it and be able to serve it.
That's so cool, and you're just a great energy too for a guest. And I
Thank you.
know it's supposed to because I've seen a couple of your podcasts, so you're just like it's a great energy, and you kind of need that when you're listening to somebody because if you have somebody that's too quiet in the background, you're falling asleep like listen to it sometimes.
True.
Which is good for bedtime, right?
Right. That's funny.
But, yeah. So what after like your podcasting? What kind of why did you decide to go into the software side? The like what established that? I'm sure it had to do something with the aerospace and all that good stuff too. But
Yeah, it's a great question. And the first thing that happened was I learned something from a guest on my podcast. I had one guest tell me, he said, "Hey Alex," he's like, and he was talking to the audience, he wasn't just talking to me, but he's like, "Here's like the framework for building a business." He goes, "You find a group of people that you care about," and I'm paraphrasing this, like this was a 20-minute conversation, but basically, you find an audience or a network or a group that you care about, that you're passionate about. You go all in on that. You talk to them, find out what they're struggling with, and then you create a solution to fix that problem that they're having. And so in my mind, like it sounded so simple. I'm like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, I'm actually going to go to this event because it was like 3 days before I was going to an event. So I went to that event and I was speaking and I told my wife, I said, "Hey, when I get off stage, people will line up to talk to me. And that's just, people are just being nice, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're a good or bad speaker. People are just they want to talk to you. And mostly just to encourage you and stuff like that." But there's about 2,000 people at this event. And when I got off stage, there was about 100 people that lined up that said the exact same thing, which I found really interesting. They said, "I'm having trouble finding ideal guests for my show, like having trouble finding ideal guests." And while I was at that event, like I even talked to some other people that were not podcasters. They were people that just released a book and they were saying, "Man, I really wish I could find the right podcast host here. There's 2,000, but I can't find the right ones."
yeah.
And the funny thing is it didn't really click for me. Like I went home just like, okay, I found a problem. What the heck do I do with that? Right. Like I now know like hosts need help finding guests. Like, what do I do with that? And that's kind of like where it all began. And like at that point, I remember I was at home about a week after the event and I was like out, the world had shut down at this point. This was 2020. So it was like March 2020. Like that event was literally the week before the whole world shut down, I feel like. And I'm in Florida. So it's like the last place in the world to shut down. So we were a little late to that game. But anyway, I was on my back porch working out because that's what I had at that point. I was like swinging a kettlebell. And like at that point, like I can remember like it, not the kettlebell, but like the idea finally hit me. Like it just like hit me. I put down the kettlebell. I ran inside to like my whiteboards, which are right behind where we're recording right now, and just whiteboard the whole idea out. I'm like, what if we just connected people automatically like dating apps connect guys and girls for dates, right? Like they connect people and they get them together. Like, can we somehow do that for a guest and a host so they can get an interview? And that was the idea. And I'll tell you what, like I wrote it all up and I was like, this is it. Like this is the solution to the problem that the people I care about are having. And that's kind of how the whole thing for PodMatch came into be.
That's that's amazing. And that's I know how we connected on PodMatch, and I've actually used that platform to find some of the guests on my two different podcasts that I have, and it's really awesome because you put in what you're looking for, or what your podcast is basically about, and then you get matched with people, and you can upgrade to get more matches, or you can go and search people and reach out to them, message them, set up a time to do like a pre-interview. It's a really fantastic idea because a lot of podcasts, that is their bread and butter to have guests and to have good quality guests. And so the process of reaching out to them and trying to get them on your show and all that process is exhausting. So you just created a huge cut to all that work that so many podcasters and show hosts have to do. And your platform is growing extremely fast from what I've been watching anyways. And It's also been mentioned. You've been mentioned in Forbes, which is huge. I mean, that's every business owner's dream.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It was
So,
mine for a long time too, and then it happened without me knowing it. Somebody, like, randomly told me. I was like, "What?" I'm like, "In
wow,
Forbes? Since when?" Really an honor. The whole thing has just been, like, a really cool thing to be part of. I would love to take credit, but honestly, it's the people that have joined it that have been willing to share it. Like, we don't do any paid advertising. People have just been it solved the problem. Once again, it solved the problem that people had, and this is an industry that with an abundance mindset. People care about each other. So people are just spreading the word on our behalf or talking about us in Forbes when we don't even know about it. That's stuff that I'm just really thankful for. Like I can't take the credit for all of that. Like, yes, I position myself well to take care of people in the industry, but it's just a blessing to be part of, honestly.
that's really true. And I love how you found the gap and you filled it and did a really great job in it and you're seeing the results. So
Hmm.
and now you've created so PodPro is your mother over your platforms basically that you created, and you guys have come out with podcast SOP. So what was kind of the reason behind that? You've got the guests that you're matching, and podcast SOP kind of follows off of that. So what was your creative mindset behind that process?
Yeah. So, going back to the original reason I created PodMatch, or like how I figured out I just found the problem and created a solution for it. Well, one thing I noticed early on with PodMatch is a lot of hosts were leaving after like 4 months. And
Mhm.
like 3, 4, like, it was all different. That's, like, maybe just when I noticed it, but I started reaching out to some because 'cause I'm like, I gotta find out what's wrong with the platform. Like, there must be a reason that they don't enjoy it. Like, what's going on? So I kept on reaching out, and I learned something that was it made me happy, kind of, and sad at the same time. Made me happy because they weren't leaving the platform, they were leaving podcasting. So I was excited to know, okay, it's not a problem with our software, but why are you stopping podcasting? And it was always like, man, I heard a lot of things. It's like, so I started talking to people. I think I talked to almost 1,000, actually just over 1,000 different people that had stopped their show to figure out like why, like what had happened, and identified a few key things. I mean, the main one being, of course, like the monetization. People want to be able to make money with it, and that's not always a realistic expectation. There's a little bit more work to go in that goes into it than maybe people think. And if they don't have the proper why for podcasting in the first place aligned with the dollar amount, people will leave. That's the main reason. Working on trying to help people with that too, but haven't figured out that one fully yet. But the second thing I heard was just the stress that was involved with podcasting. So like I wanted to drill into, I'm like, well, why is podcasting stressful? Like you can't just say it's stressful because it's not for all of us. Like what makes it stressful? And what I narrowed it down to was a lack of systems and processes that each person had. And my background in aerospace, like I was an operations guy. Like that's what I did. I was a senior executive at the company. I was over 5 departments of the company, and my whole job was to streamline our processes and protect our profit margins. Like that's all I did. So when I heard about this problem, I was like actually excited because I'm like, hold on, if you're stressed out and it's because you don't have a system, you're just using like sticky notes everywhere and like you have like a whiteboard with your ideas on it. Not that those are bad things, but if that's not helping you feel organized and you feel like you always have to remember stuff in your head, it's like what David Allen says. He's like a big productivity guy. He says that your head is for having ideas, not for storing them. And if you're trying to store too many ideas up there, you're gonna get stressed out. So the idea behind podcast SOP was to release something that'll actually help podcast hosts get their episodes out on time by giving them a checklist of all the things that they uniquely do. So each host can kind of build their own. We have some templates they can use, but basically the idea was like, hey, here's what you say, like not me. This is what you say, the 10 things you do every time you're releasing an episode and when you should do them. And if they have a team member who's assigned to it, can you comment back and forth? Can you upload media? Basically, project management software specifically for podcast hosts when they want to release episodes on time. And some people were like, well, why don't you just use like a Monday.com or Asana or Trello or Basecamp, any of those? And the problem is if you're not already familiar with those and you're already stressed out about podcasting and I send you something that does 20,000 different things, albeit they're good things, that does not help your level of stress. So the only thing podcast SOP does is helps podcast hosts actually release episodes on time. And the goal was, it can relieve the stress. And so again, I just saw that other problem. That's why we created the second software. And it's how we'll create our next one and release it as well. It's just identifying the continuous problem that our members have and how can we help them solve those things. So that's why we did this.
That's amazing. Yeah, podcasting is not for the faint of heart. It is a little bit more, you know, it's kind of like creating a newsletter. It's not necessarily very money making oriented, but it's becoming such a thing where people go to listen and learn, and it's a really great way to have an influence. And it is hard. So and also too, that goes back to, I think we were talking a little bit about this earlier about the content creating and how Instagram, so many of the platforms, TikTok, Facebook, they've changed their algorithm so that the influencers on there have to create content on a certain time frame. They have to get it out this time. They have to do it, this many reels, this many that sort of videos and whatever to be able to create their engagement and keep that going. And they're changing how everything works. So it's just another thing to have to worry about. And if you're not making money, right off the bat from it, it does get frustrating and it gets really discouraging. Um, and so I really think that's a great, like, what a great idea. There's so many people that are creating these agencies where they can do all the postings for you at certain times. So why not have that for podcasting? Like, this is a software that people can use. They don't have to use the Asana or
Right.
Salesforce, all this other stuff that you can do, which is just an extra CRM as a thing to worry about. So this is really cool for podcasting. I'm
Thank you.
excited about this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And talking about all the social media stuff, like we have like a parent company, as you mentioned, PodPros. So like
Yeah.
we did that specific. People were like, why'd you do that? Maybe it's a bad idea. Maybe I'll come back to you in 6 months, Ashley, and be like, that was a terrible idea. Don't ever repeat that. But in my mind, I'm like, I don't want all social channels for Podcast SOP and all social channels for PodMatch. And then our next brand, like as we keep on growing, I'm like, let's just put it all under one parent company name and all the social media be in one place, and we just direct people to the different services they're interested in. That to me made sense in my head. Maybe that's not the right move, but we'll find out. But for right now, it seems to be working pretty well for us and streamlining that, because social media can just be a lot, and it's not one of my strength zones.
No, it is a lot, and I think most content creators are experiencing that. And I'm probably going to do a show soon about the burnout that a lot of creative minds are running into. And you can't put creative minds on a deadline too often, because eventually it gets burned out. So I think that's gonna happen pretty soon with a lot of content creators out there.
I could imagine that. And then also just the over, like you're saying, like the burnout. That's gonna be a good topic. I'm looking forward to hearing that episode that you bring, because so many of us, even with podcasting, like when someone's like, okay, you need a podcast, well, you also need a blog, you also need a TikTok, you need all these different things. It's like, man, keep the main thing the main thing. If you try to do all of it, you spread yourself too thin. You can't actually do any of it well. Just start with the one thing that you say is most important, and until you master that, stick with that one thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I was thinking back today, even Hollywood, professionals and people that are in the Hollywood mindset that go to their auditions and movies and stuff, they go through a lot of the burnout process as well. And they don't have to necessarily always be at quite the level as they're getting up there at the same level as influencers, are almost on that same level where they have to be in that spotlight 24/7. And so it does create a lot of backgrounds, things that are going to probably we'll start seeing here pretty soon. So yeah, that'll be interesting. But
It
anyways,
will.
back to you. Back to the software here. How do you feel like, since social audio is such a growing environment platform right now, how do you feel that you're kind of on the groundbreaking software platform for this? Like, I feel like podcasting has grown. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think it's like 14% in the last couple years, and that's a huge amount. And it's becoming bigger and bigger. Social audio, like even Twitter, has gone to having their own spaces, and there's a lot of current platforms that are thinking about moving to more of a social audio type setting too. That's you. You've started this software that's a kind of a groundbreaking. Like, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, it's a little surreal. Like it's kind of, again, like I can't take a lot of credit for it. Like my timing was not had nothing to do with me. Like this is just when I had the idea. But if you think about it, like one of the reasons podcasting now is starting to grow, and you're seeing all these other service companies, like they cover all elements of podcasting. They're showing up because people follow where the dollars are going, and the ad spend in podcasting is just like, I mean, it passed the billion mark last year, I believe. Anyway, like it keeps on growing. So like the actual ad money that's going into it, the money that's being poured into podcasting is like, just, it's a lot. Like it's really going for us. And I see people like, okay, well, I want a piece of them and start creating things. And we got in like right before that. So the timing was just like really right. But again, it is cool because for me, like I don't need to sound like weird by saying this, because most founders wouldn't say this, but I don't necessarily care about the money. Like I need it to live. Like I've got to eat and things like that. That's great. And sure, I want to create wealth for my family, but my main focus, like forget all those things. My main focus is how can we help independent voices get heard through podcasting? Like that is my absolutely that's what keeps me up at night. It's what helps me sleep well at night when I know I'm doing that, right? Like, how can I continue to help these independent voices get heard? And I believe that podcasting is really like the last true line of independent voices getting heard exactly how they are. It's part of the decentralized web because it uses RSS. Like, that's what podcasting uses. So like, if Apple's like, hey, you can't say that, we're going to shut you down, it doesn't really matter. There's hundreds and thousands of other places you can find that exact same piece of content. Like, there's no like, you have to listen to it here unless you have like an exclusive with Spotify, which I'm not a huge fan of. But the thing is, like, anybody can share exactly what they're thinking and feeling. And I really like that because I think it's important that we hear the true, authentic voice of the independent individual, because I think that's how we can stay in touch with like where the world's at, not so much like the more agenda seeking type of content. And I'm not trying to get into politics and stuff like that, but like on TV, you're only going to hear what fits kind of the mold of where the world's going. And on social media, you're going to get really shut down if you're talking about something other than that, right? I saw that firsthand with one of my businesses I had on there. Like, in 1 month, we went from like huge exposure to almost none. And when I was like trying to figure out what was wrong, basically I finally got a hold of somebody at Facebook, and they're like, it's just not the agenda we're pushing anymore. Like, we can't show people your content. Like, it's the wrong direction we want the world to go in. And they're big enough that they can actually make that move. But I like podcasting because it's the opposite of that. Little rant there. Sorry, Ashley, and sorry, everybody. But like, that's just what I'm passionate about.
No, I love that. It's very true. And I think you couldn't have said that better. The way the big mainstream everything can be directed, just whatever, whoever's going to pay for it and buy it out, basically. And I think we've gotten to see that really well over the last 2 years. And podcasting, you're so right. It's the individual voice. People can come out and talk about whatever they're feeling or whatever they believe is correct and all that stuff. Like, that is a great way to have that American voice, or have that
right,
any voice to be able to have a platform on, basically. And it's okay, it's your viewpoint, and to actually know what's really going on, things like that. And I think we saw this a little bit with TikTok, where people got to have that connection with what really goes on in the world and what really goes on behind people's, the facade that you see so much of, or what is on TV and what TV is telling us first, and until it got stopped a little bit. But yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I think it's a really great, and you're an awesome content creator and designer because you actually care about the people behind it. You're not just there for the money. And that's what makes you a step above probably most business owners and stuff. Because yes, you do have to make money. Everybody needs it to run. But if you are putting your client first, you're ultimately going to get to your end goal and be able to help out everybody in the process. And that's just a huge, we need more people like that in the world.
I agree. I write this down every day. Like, I have a journal sitting, like, I don't have my phone in arm's reach. My phone's like in another room, but I have a journal that's next to me. I write on it every day. And something that I write down is that Alex Sanfilippo seeks to be a person of value, not a person of profit. I believe that when we add value to other people's lives, that profit eventually follows. And maybe it doesn't, but at the end of the day, I'm more interested in adding value to people. And if I can do that, then I believe I've done my job. And it's never failed me before. Some people will be like, that sounds so cheesy, man. Like, you got to go after the money. I've always found if I just focus on the value, the money seems to follow. And I've, again, never had that fail me. Don't know if there's any science behind that. Maybe it sounds too crazy to people, but for me, that's what I've based my life on. And I'm going to continue doing that. So I'm just looking at the areas I'm most passionate about, which right now is podcasting. Maybe it won't be always, but right now, that's where I'm interested. And I'm just going to do my best to add value to the people that are in this space every chance I possibly get.
Yeah. No, I think that's so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Alex. I really appreciate that.
For sure.
And like, to piggyback off of that, what are some things that you've learned from the process that you would love to share with other people that are getting into that? You told us a little bit about, or some things you didn't expect, or there's always that, right? But just stuff that you would want to share with those who are coming up behind you that are looking to you as a role model.
Yeah. Thank you for that. This is a really insightful question. I'm glad that you asked this one. This is interesting to be able to talk about. No one ever asks stuff like this. So thank you for that. The first thing I learned is when it comes to software, like, the old build it and they will come mentality is not right. It needs to be bring the people first, then build it, which sounds really weird. But at the end of the day, what you want to do first is just prove the concept. And we do this with all types of content. Like, we want to make sure that before we start building something, put our time into it, that it's actually hitting the mark. Is it actually helping the right people? Is it actually working the way they want it to? And a way to do that in software, because you need something, right, is to do what's just called developing an MVP, minimum viable product, like absolutely bare bones what you can do. And so when we launched PodMatch, we launched it Basically, it was text only. There was no logo. And I launched it with 100 people that I met at that event. I just asked them for their contact information. I got it from them, said, here it is. Tell me, does it work? And sure, I got some people being like, wow, it's really slow. And they're like, wow, you should get a logo, or like, could you put any more text on a single page? Like I got those type of comments, but I just went back to them like, does it work? Is it doing what you want it to do? Maybe not at the level you want it to, but is it doing what you want it to do? And we were able to actually verify the fact that, yes, we're on the right track. So once you do something like that, then you want to focus on continuous improvement. So again, like anything that you're going to do, even with a podcast, get the idea out there. You're going to start a website, a blog, anything. Get the idea out there. And a friend of mine named Chris Krimitsos, who's big in the podcasting space, he calls this Starting Ugly. He has a book called Starting Ugly, which literally means make it ugly, get it out there, and just see what happens with it. If it sticks, you can focus on that continuous improvement. So for us, like we don't have the prettiest, most polished product yet, but I'm telling you what, it's doing what people want it to do. And as long as it does what people want to do, then we focus on polishing it up, making it look nicer. Like, at the end of the day, if you have like a, like if you buy I think it's maybe it's Lexus or something like that, they put like the bow on the car around Christmas time. It's a nice car. It runs really well. So that bow is like beautiful on it. If I put that same bow on a car that like doesn't run and has problems, doesn't matter. You can wrap it up and make it as pretty as you want. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like it's got to work first. So the only reason that whole bow concept works is you're like, oh shoot, it's a Mercedes. It's going to run great. So, and many people, unfortunately, we get in this mindset of comparing our day one to someone else's year 20. So like you look at somebody else and you're like, man, they have got such good social media. Their branding is beautiful. Their website is stunning. I need all of that. Then I can start doing what they're doing. It's absolutely the opposite. You've got to start doing the things that you can add value with, and then focus on that continuous improvement. So it's a little bit of another rant there. Sorry about that. But that's a big lesson that I've had to learn. And I have to continuously remind myself to not become a perfectionist, but instead focus on just getting it out there for people and getting my creative work out to the world as fast as I can, and then focusing on improving it. That's probably my biggest lesson learned. And I'm telling you what, if I would have known that before starting anything else, I would be a lot further along today. But now I know the importance of just getting out there as fast as you possibly can.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you saying that. And I can tell you're very passionate about it. And that's something that so many people need to hear. Like, because you have that, I need to be as good as the Joneses kind of mindset, right? And you can't, especially since you're starting out, you don't have the budget, you don't have the rapport, whatever, comes along the way, right? So you need to get your idea there, especially for um, development of the web or any kind of application. If you've thought of it, more than likely thousands of other people have. So who's going to get there first? And I think that's one of the things that Apple and Microsoft go back and forth about, right? So it is one of those things that you really, like what you said. What was it? Start 30, and then what was it? What was the ending?
Yeah, start ugly and focus on continuous improvement. And that's it. Like if you can follow that loop, then you're good. And just getting out in front of people as quickly as you possibly can for some feedback, really important. One more thing I'd like to throw in there if we have time, Ashley, if you don't mind, I have one more thing. Okay, it's to ask better questions. I have a friend, Rob Fitzpatrick, and he has a book called The Mom Test. And before I read this book, I asked the worst questions. I basically put something in front of somebody like you, Ashley, and be like, Ashley, what do you think? Do you think it's good? Like, what are your thoughts on it? And I would write down what you say. The problem is I didn't ask you a question that was very good, because I don't really leave room. If you like me, you're not going to want to break my heart. So you're going to be like, yeah, it's cool. It's pretty good. Like, it's all right. Like at worst, you're going to say that. But again, going back to the mom test, Rob says you need to ask questions that are so good that your mom couldn't even lie to you about it. And here's why he says that, because here's just, this example is not in the book, but imagine that you decide to invent an umbrella that doesn't keep the sun out of your face and it doesn't stop rain. And you tell your mom about that idea. Like that idea to you, you're like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Your mom would be like, oh, honey, you're going to succeed. You're going to do so good with everything you do, right? Like she's going to lie to you about it. But if you position it in a way of like, what if there was an umbrella, mom, that didn't stop the rain or the sun? Like, do you think that anyone would ever want something like that? She'd say, absolutely not. So I asked the same question. I just positioned it in a way that my heart wouldn't get broken because I disconnected myself from it. When I started developing software, I asked questions about, this is what I'm building. I'm so excited about it. What do you think? And that question can't get answered properly. Instead, when you ask a better question, like here's an example of like, hey, I noticed there's some people in the podcasting space having trouble getting their episodes released on time. Do you think that people would use a software if it helped them release their episodes on time and did so in a really strategic way? Anyone have any thoughts or feedback? I pulled myself out of the question. Now I can get real responses from people. Someone could be like, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. Doesn't hurt my feelings. They don't think they're hurting my feelings because I'm disconnected from it. So asking better questions with whatever you're creating and pulling yourself out of the equation
Yeah.
is the best way you can get true feedback that you can actually act upon.
Wow, that's fantastic. Because a lot of times it's your baby, right? And
Yeah.
you don't want anybody to touch your baby. And so a lot of times as parents, we don't we don't allow the good feedback to our babies that we need, sometimes. And so it would help us in the long run. So I really appreciate you saying that. Just pull yourself out and say, this is the product here. What's the good, the bad, the ugly, what where do we need to go with this, basically. So
Yeah.
that's a huge fact. And I really appreciate you saying that. So get out there, don't feel like you need to be like the Joneses, and ask better questions. That's really huge. Yeah, any other final last remarks, that sounds so bad. But any
Final thoughts,
final words
words
of
of
wisdom?
wisdom, any of those things, right? I think that the biggest thing that I would want to share is to remember that it's so important that we keep others in mind with what we're developing, and we don't lose touch with that. One of the problems I've found in a lot of businesses is we lose sight of day one. And what I mean by that is when you feel that you've arrived and you don't need to be in direct communication with anyone who's using your product, service, listening to your podcast, reading your blog, like when you feel like you can disconnect from that, that's what I call day two. And you stop growing after day one with anything. The idea is to keep a day one mentality, which means I need to have touch with the people that are using whatever it is that I'm providing. I need to have that actual interaction. You find that companies that seem to start failing or when they lose touch with who's actually using their product. A great example of this would actually be Volkswagen, which is mostly a German vehicle, right? Like, and they've always done really good with sales over there, but they decided to develop a really high end vehicle, which no one's ever heard. I can't even think of the name, but they developed a really high end vehicle thinking they were going to crush it. They were going to compete with Ferrari, like it was like a crazy vehicle of some sort. Nobody bought it. And they started a whole division for this and stuff like that, but nobody bought it. And when the C suite goes back, I'm like, what the heck happened? Why did nobody buy this car? It's because they forgot who their actual customer is. Their customer is people that are on the lower end income level that are just looking to have a car that's going to get them from work to home and to get their kids to school and all that, right? They lost touch with who they were. And when they did that, they offered something that did not like really communicate with who their actual audience was. And there was no interest in it. So I think for everybody, whatever it is that you're creating, remember, you've got to have that day one mentality of I've got to have my feet on the ground. Yes, it's doing things that don't scale is a good way to say it, but you've got to have at least a little bit of touch point, because when you lose that, I believe your company or whatever it is that you're doing will actually start failing.
That's so true. Yep, and a lot of companies have, they've seen the difference, and I've actually witnessed it firsthand. I used to work with Pure One back in the day, and obviously Pure One is no longer. And it was because they went outside their niche. They went outside what they were known for, and that took them downhill really, really fast.
Hmm.
So yeah, if you have branded yourself in a certain way, and you know your audience and you know what they're looking for, you need to stick with it. Unless you're planning on really shifting the ball into something that may be similar to it. But if you go completely the opposite direction, you're going to lose pretty much most of your clientele. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, that's so true. Well, thank you so much, Alex. You are a breath of fresh air and just a really fantastic person to talk to. Where can everybody find your amazing products and your, software, and where can they find you to support and follow you and all that good stuff?
Yeah, Ashley, thanks so much for having me. This was a blast. You're a great host. Like I said, a curious host is the best kind. I think that's what we can all learn from. So, something else that's important, a little bonus here, is having a singular call to action. If anyone's ever on a podcast or anywhere, have a singular call to action, which means one place that you send everybody. So that's why we have podpros.com. So that is why, like, I created this. You can find all my social links, all my podcast is there. Everything I do can be found at podpros.com. And so that's where I am sending everybody today. And Ashley, thank you again. Honestly, I think that your audience is in really good hands with you. So just keep on doing what you're doing. I think it's really incredible how you're serving the world here.
Thank you so much, Alex. That means the world. You have no idea. Sometimes it's a lonely world out there, and it's good to hear from somebody who's gone before and got that great experience. So thank you so much. And everybody, thanks so much for Alex joining. Please definitely go and check out the software. It's amazing. It's absolutely a lifesaver, especially if you've got your own podcast and need guests. PodMatch is quite amazing. So definitely go and check out podpros.com. You will not be sorry. And we will see you next time back here at Malabash Media. Take care, everybody.